His heart beats. His heart beats. Do you hear it? His heart beats for the lost, to show them the way God leads with true love, agape. His heart beats for the committed, who seek his favor and grace, knowing he never fails. There's no giant that they cannot face. His heart beats for the faithful, for the flawed but favored and gifted, and for the forgotten, he offers adoption, because his heart beats for righteousness, restoration, justice, and love, for me and for you, to heal our heart condition, so that we can have hearts that beat for his glory and for his purpose and for his kingdom, with his love, the love of God, a steady metronome that cares, moves, and responds with forgiveness and compassion. Your heart beats too. But what does it beat for?
Well, I just want to greet everybody and say hello. My name is Brian Mowry. I'm one of the lead pastors here. And we are in a year that we're calling Ignite Compassion. We're really excited as we enter into this year. We launched it just a couple weeks ago. And today, as we're in this series called Heart Condition, we have a special guest speaker with us. Gregg Taylor is with us, and we're so excited to have him as he speaks into what it means to be people who live compassionate lives. Just a little bit about Gregg. He has spent 30 years bridging the gap between the marginalized and the majority. He works for a ministry called Revision in Houston, Texas, where he guides youth and the staff there. He's an author. He wrote the book Here Now with You. We hope that you pick up a copy today. It's an excellent book telling the story of what it means to live a compassionate life. And we're just thrilled to have him. Craig, Adam, and I have been talking with him for over 6 months now, and we feel real heart connection with him. He's a part of the family here at Walnut Hill. We know you're going to be blessed by it. And so at this point, I just want to welcome Reverend Gregg Taylor to the stage. Gregg, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Am I on here? Here we go. Well, good morning, Walnut Hill. It's so it's good to be here. And as Brian said, we've been having conversations for months about this. And I have to say that when I began to find out about a church that was going to spend a whole year on compassion, igniting compassion, focused on that, one, I was impressed, and two, I was inspired. And it's just a great, my delight to be here and to participate in at least in a small way with you in this Igniting Compassion year. And I would say too that all of you in this community know what it's like to live that way. And you have this church and its campuses is on the ground day after day, living compassionate lives, and probably in a lot of ways that that you're not aware of. But I'm confident that compassion is already on the move through this place, and thank you for letting me be a part of it. If you're interested, at 5 o'clock today, we're going to do another service at here at the Bethel campus, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper into some of the things that we've talked about this morning. And I want to invite you to come, and I hope you will be here for, or be at Bethel for that later this evening. I was driving to Austin. I'm from Houston. I was driving to Austin one morning to visit my son, who was in college at the University of Texas. And early in the morning, I get down the road a little bit outside of Houston, and about 6:30, and I have to run in, and I got to use the bathroom. So I pull into a McDonald's in a little bitty Texas town, and go to the restroom, and then I think, oh, I'm going to go ahead and get me a cup of coffee to go. So I get up to the counter, and I'm standing there, and this young lady with purple hair, a yellow bandana, some tattoos, and some hardware in her face, bounces up at the counter and says, "Good morning." And I was like, well, good morning. I'm thinking she's a morning person, right? And she said, "What can I get you?" And I said, well, really, I just want a cup of coffee to go. And she goes, "1 cup of coffee to go? Will there be anything else?" "No, that'll be it." Then she says this to me. She says, "Would you like to pay with love?" Well, I'm not sure. What did you have in mind? She said that, well, you can pay with love here at McDonald's now. And I said, well, what does that mean? She said, well, there's 3 ways you can pay with love. You can take out your phone and you can text someone to tell them that you love them. Or you can call someone right here and tell them that you love them. I said, oh, I left my phone in my truck, and so I can't do that. What's the 3rd way? And she said, well, you can give someone a big hug and tell them that you love them. I said, anyone? She goes, anyone. You can give a big hug. So I look around the Golden Arches Supper Club, and there's a family over here, a young mother with like 3 kids, very young, and it looks like it's been a hard night. And they're kind of cranky, and I was like, I don't want to disturb that. And then I looked over here, and there was this gentleman. I assume he was a trucker. He had a big trucker hat on. He had a cut-off T-shirt, and it looked like he'd been on the road for a while. And I wasn't feeling that. And so I turned back to her, this young lady, and I said, what about you? Can I give you a big hug? And with that, she leaps onto the stainless steel counter, slides across it like, a ball player stealing third, and then lands right in front of me like this. She goes, yes. And so we embrace right there in the McDonald's and have ourselves a big hug. Well, she gets back over on the other side. She goes, I have to tell you, now that you've paid with love, you can get anything you want. And I have to tell you that suddenly the whole menu opened up for me. The whole menu. No longer was I just going to take a cup of coffee to go, but I got the eggs, I got the bacon, I got the pancakes, and sat there, and I'm like, why not? I just paid with love. And you know what? I walked out of McDonald's that morning, get back in my truck, actually a little bit more hopeful about the human condition. Who would have thought that you could pay with love? Imagine that you could pay with love. I wonder what that looks like. What does it look like to pay with love? I think it turns out, God has already given us a good idea. And he has given us everything we need, I think, to do that. What does Jesus say? Luke 6:36. Be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. Jesus, in saying that, echoes something coming out of the Torah. And I think he's saying that hoping that someone might just catch wind of this universal cosmic kindness in which God shows up in the world. In which God shows up to pay with love. And compassion is the currency that God gives to each of us to ensure that we learn to pay with love every chance we get. Be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. Compassion is as common to being human as the heart that is beating in your chest. You already know what it is to experience it, and you probably know what it is to resist it. It's always accessible, but it's not always readily expressed. Your capacity to access it and express it can actually be diminished by the awful things that perhaps you have experienced. And yet, the terrible things that you've been through in an amazing way can open your life up to it in ways that make you think, oh, maybe this is what it feels like to be human. Maybe this is what it feels like to encounter God. Your willingness to apply it to yourself takes you to this freeing space of self-awareness and self-acceptance as you compassionate yourself. In learning to love yourself, you find yourself in God, and you find God in yourself, and all of that in the middle of this messy mix of your own humanness. Compassion, with compassion, churches, ministries, and even organizations, they flourish. You've probably experienced this. They flourish with this felt sort of life-giving sense of authenticity and grace and hope. And maybe you've experienced this too. Without it, churches and ministries and organizations can become chilled, stagnant, disconnected. And if your experience is like anything like mine, even downright mean. With compassion comes God's gift of experiencing what it means to be loved and to love in ways that Jesus experienced his own belovedness and showed others theirs. Compassion is what centered him. It nourished him and birthed his life from this loving, creative space of the womb of Yahweh, the womb of God. Hebrew word for compassion has to do with God's womb. Compassion inspired Jesus' imagination to see the world God dreams, to actually see the world as other people see it, and to help others appreciate what God has in mind for them. Compassion moved Jesus to this inward toward this sacred, sometimes even scary place of touching his own pain and coming to grips with his own identity. You probably know some of these passages of Jesus being moved with compassion, with this visceral stirring in his gut. Compassion compelled him outward to stand and to suffer with others, fighting for those who could not fight for themselves, embracing with this tenderness folks not only trying to survive on the margins of society, but struggling to find meaning in the anguishing throes of dehumanizing hopelessness. Compassion is divine. It is human. It's where the divine and the human meet. Be compassionate, just as God is compassionate. Be compassionate. Your identity It's connected to the identity of the God whose heart moves with compassion. This is audacious, don't you think, for Jesus to suggest? Audacious. And Jesus invites us to expand our imaginations, to learn to think like God thinks, to love like God loves, and to step into God's large and generous way of being in the world, a way of being in the world who God is. We're invited to be in the world who God is. It's a way characterized by this new reality that God's compassionating presence makes personal appearances in and through your lives. That's how it works. The spirituality of compassion locates itself in the physicality of your relationships. In other words, compassion has skin on it. And it compels us to have skin in the game. Your skin, and my skin, our skin, all of our collective skin in the game. Be compassionate, just as God is compassionate. Every first Friday of the month, we take a group of volunteers into a maximum security prison. We've developed a community inside this prison for young men under 18 years old who are serving adult sentences. These kids have been certified by the state of Texas, certified to stand trial as an adult, and then each of them could receive an adult sentence up to the death penalty or life without parole. And you meet a 17-year-old kid who has two 50-year sentences stacked on top of each other, or a young man who is doing life and he's 16 years old. It does something to you. On one particular Friday, we had a group of young men there, and typically what we do is we bring in like 35 pizzas, and we end up doing what basically amounts to like a church youth group. I mean, we have music, we have some games, we do some icebreakers. We have all these adults who come in and build relationships with these kids that carry on past the Friday. So on this particular Friday, we go into this prison called Burning Hell, nicknamed Burning Hell. It's called the Clemens Unit, technically, but the inmates for decades and decades have called it Burning Hell. Built in 1888, the second oldest unit in the state of Texas prison system. No heat, no air conditioning, built on an old slave plantation, as many are. That's another topic of conversation. We go in, and there's a young man named, I'll call him Luis, who had arrived like 2 days before. He had been bounced around the foster system, given up by his parents at birth. I think by the time we met him, he had been in 30 different placements. He got in a fight with a foster sibling, and by policy, the Department of Family and Protective Services, when a foster sibling gets in a fight with another foster sibling, they have to call the police. They call the police, he is arrested, and he is charged with aggravated assault. So he ends up at Burning Hell. I usually do a brief message with them, and I know this particular Friday, the message is on you belong to God, you belong to us, you belong to each other. And to start that, I asked everybody in the room, they're gathered around tables, to talk about this question. When in your life did you feel like you most belonged? When in your life did you feel most included, that you most belonged? And so some kids are talking over here with some of the volunteers. One says, oh, when my mom says she loves me. Or another young man says, when I was on a basketball team, when I was in junior high. And Luis is sitting with one of our volunteers named Seth. And Seth turns to Luis and says to him, well, what about you, Luis? Where he's just gotten there 2 days before. Never had a place to call home. No one in his life. What about you, Luis? When did you feel like you most belong? And he paused. And he looked up at Seth and said, as if it was obvious, well, right here. Now. With you. Right here. Now with you. These words are soaked in hope, pouring out of a harassed and helpless heart, expressing the assurance of finally knowing that you are no longer a no one, because there is a someone who cares right here, now, with you. I don't know who was more transformed by that, Luis or Seth. I suspect they both were. The mutuality of God's grace begins to impact both of their lives. And in this mystery of God's presence, you begin to experience something that you've never experienced before. I think it was Mother Teresa who said, or somebody writing about Mother Teresa who said that every time a faithful servant serves another who's in need, what happens in that moment is a miracle indeed. As they look to one another, in an instant it is clear. Only Jesus is visible, for they both disappear. I don't know, but my guess is that here now with you is what it looks like to pay with love. Because here now with you is how the God of love chooses to pay with love, chooses to show up in the world. In the Gospels, you see it from the very beginning. You shall call his name what? Emmanuel, which means God with us. God here now with you. In the gospel, it also looks like Jesus here now with a man suffering from leprosy, isolated and alienated from his community. Emotionally, socially, religiously, Jesus moved with compassion, chooses to close that gap of social and religious and psychological alienation, even economic alienation, by showing up to touch him and bless a ravaged and ruptured body, which has been cursed as untouchable. You see it when Jesus travels several hours across choppy seas to go to the other side, to arrive on the opposite shore for one purpose, to show up here now with one severely traumatized man living among the tombs, ostracized and left alone with the dead to deal with his own demons alone. It's Jesus here now with prostitutes and crooks breaking religious laws and social constructs by sitting around a dinner table and having conversation and talking about how much life hurts and how much God desires to heal. It looks like Jesus here now with a convicted felon, one on his right and one on his left, suffering alongside them this violent, dehumanizing ordeal of crucifixion, capital punishment, all the while expanding their vision of hope just on the horizon. Today, paradise. It's Jesus opening his eyes to the world around him to see the crowds, women, men, and children who live these harassed and helpless and hassled lives, hung out to dry, marginalized to the point of being harried by night and haunted by day with a nagging sense of nobodiness, as Martin Luther King said. And then moved by what he sees, Jesus feels this stirring of compassion, this labored movement deep in his gut, this womb of God, which compels him to act and to give birth to a grace that includes and stands with, that is here now with them. So at the very least, they know they are not out here all alone. And as Jesus then saying to his disciples, hey guys, open your eyes. Let the pain you see move you to receive compassion's pull deep in your gut to be here now with them. Oh, I guess, truth be told, it looks like you. And it looks like me. Each of us finding some willingness in our lives to say yes to the question, would you like to pay with love? Would you? Saying yes to compassionating our wounded, hurting, broken world by being willing to show up here now with wounded, hurting, disconnected, and broken people looking for hope in places like burning hell and in places like Bethel, like Danbury, and Newtown, and New Milford, and Derby, and Seymour, and Waterbury, and am I missing anyone? In Connecticut. You get the point. I think it was the poet Mirabai who wrote, only the wounded understand the agonies of the wounded. Only the wounded understand the agonies of the wounded. And I hear that and I think, you know what? I guess we're in luck here in this place. I guess we're in luck. I've got wounds. You've got wounds. All God's children got wounds. And the good news is that our wounds create the conduit through which compassion flows, putting God's currency of compassion in our pockets so that we can pay with love every chance we get. I want to invite you to hear this with me. I still try to wrap myself around this or let it wrap around me, this truth. That the presence of God is made known through the presence of women and men and children, people like you and me, who because of, not despite, but because of our own pain and brokenness, we step out with courage to expand capacity to see and treat others with such loving kind-heartedness, non-judgmental acceptance, and welcoming embrace that it reveals the heart of God. Your life matters. And compassion embraces no matter what, no matter where, no matter who, and no matter how life turns or who turns up at the door. God's compassionating presence makes itself known through you. Be compassionate, just as God is compassionate. I was thinking about this poet Hafez, who says, ever since compassion heard your name, it has been running through the streets trying to find you. And today, God himself came to my door, asking me for your address, wanting the beautiful warmth of your heart's fire. So, can I ask you one more time? You don't have to answer now. You can think about it, consider, ponder, meditate, contemplate it. Would you, each of you, would you like to pay with love? I can't help but thinking and wondering what it would be like if we lived like that. And maybe you can pray as you have been praying, and let me join you in this really brief prayer. Lord, give us your heart. Lord, give us